Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House. The procession begins by the Sergeant-at-Arms carrying in the provincial mace. The mace is the traditional symbol of the Legislative Assembly's authority. The history and culture of Alberta are reflected in the design of the mace. It features the crown, the wild rose, sheaves of wheat, buffalo heads, and armorial arms. Gems surrounding the crown combine to spell out the word Alberta, and those stones are amethyst, lapis lazuli, beryl, emerald, ruby, topaz, and aquamarine. The present mace was presented to the Assembly by the Civil Service Association of Alberta in 1955 and replaces the original mace, which was made out of a piece of brass bedstead and a shaving mug. Both maces are on display daily in the halls of the legislature. Before we pray, may I say that the hums of happy birthday are greatly appreciated. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, in response to questions dated March 30, 1988 from the Honourable Member for Edmonton Glengarry, I am today filing 2 copies of all the plans and specifications and all construction contracts awarded to date for the Oldman River Dam and related work components of the project. To assist Honourable Members in reading the documents, I'm also filing lists of the 21 separate contracts and plans. And Mr. Speaker, with your permission, and to assist the pages, it might be appropriate if the member from Glengarry would personally come over and pick up his set.
No other pages are covered by WCB if they're injured lifting all this.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Agriculture, followed by Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, sir, and members of the Legislative Assembly, 6 members of the 13th Girl Guide Company. They're accompanied by Ruth Warbitz. They're in the members' gallery, and I'd ask if they'd rise to receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 31 grade 6 students from Donnan Elementary School in the constituency of beautiful Avonmore. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Farron, Mr. Asquith, the principal, and parents, Mrs. Ann Hartwig and Mrs. Erica Jucum. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, I'm privileged today to introduce to you and through you to members of this House 2 school groups from Goldbar. The first group, Mr. Speaker, are 18 in number, grade 6 class from Fulton Place Elementary School, and they're accompanied by their teacher, Mr. John Ray. I would ask that they stand and be acknowledged and welcomed by this House. They're in the members' gallery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second group is another grade 6 class from Waverley School. There are 36 members in number, and they're accompanied by their teacher, Evelyn Passmore, and parents, Mrs. Klingbeil, Mrs. Jaritsma, Mrs. Muse, and Mimi Bedard, an aide. They too are in the members' gallery if they would rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Edmonton Millwoods, Athabasca Lac La Biche, and Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, deseo presentar a usted y a los otros miembros de la Asamblea a la señora Olivia Oñate, uno de los artistas más respetados y admirados de Chile. Ella está recorriendo Canadá utilizando el arte y la música para transmitir a los canadienses la lucha del pueblo chileno por la libertad y la democracia. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask Mrs. Oñate to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Athabasca Lac La Biche.
Mr. Speaker, I'm privileged to introduce to you members of the Métis Coalition Society of Alberta. Mr. Felix Desjardins, the President and Director of Operation. He's also a settlement councillor of Buffalo Lake in my constituency. His wife, Esther Desjardins. From Kitchener, Fred Pruden, Secretary-Treasurer. Harvey Whitford, Liaison Officer. Penny Walton, Marshall House, Public Relation. And Stein Ridgedale, who's also an active member in that society. I would ask the House to please give these people a warm welcome today.
Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure today to introduce 29 terrific grade 6 students from the School of Carnarvon in the constituency of Calder. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Bauerfeind, Mr. Wyatt, and a parent, Mrs. Faulkner. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Mr. Campbell, please.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I have in front of me here an urgent memo from the Assistant Deputy Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs dated April the 24th, 1984, in which Mr. Darwish acknowledges that 2 investment companies, First Investors and Associated Investors, had overvalued assets and particularly no capital to speak of. Now, he indicated, and I quote, that serious consideration should also be given to an immediate curtailment of FICS's and AICS's licenses. Very clear. That's back in 1984. Now, obviously, Mr. Speaker, despite these dire warnings, the companies continued to sell contracts to an unsuspecting public. My question to the Premier, has the Premier made any inquiries at all into why these warnings were ignored, and if so, why were they ignored?
Inquiries, Mr. Speaker, the very matter is before an inquiry, and those are public documents, have been put before the code inquiry, and we're waiting to hear the results of that inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is accountability here in the legislature, and this was a government document, Mr. Speaker. The Premier's got to do a little better than that, Mr. Speaker. My question is, he asked for a meeting with the minister at that time in 1984 to talk about the apparent demise of these 2 companies. My question is to the Premier, we want to know why no action was taken. Would the Premier indicate if he has at least attempted to find that out, and will he finally tell the people of Alberta what was going on?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't here in those days, but regardless, this matter is before a public inquiry ordered by the courts, And it's silly for me to start trying to deal with one little part of it when we are getting a full investigation, and that investigation with a report to the public of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, you'll find out how silly it is after the next election, because people are upset about this. Now, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Mr. Cormie said, and I quote, he said by a senior government official, "You seem to be highly regarded at the cabinet level, but you're terribly regarded at the regulatory level." My question to the Premier, has he been able to find out why he was so good of friends with the cabinet and not with the regulators? Has he looked into that, Mr. Speaker?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thought the member could do better than that. Those comments came when Premier Manning or Premier Strome was in place. I mean, that is one of the most foolish questions in the time I've ever been in the legislature to hear come from that individual.
Again, Mr. Speaker, whenever he doesn't want to answer the question, he resorts to name-calling, Mr. Speaker. Right. Some performance by this Premier. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, my question is well known that the Cormies were contributors to the Conservative Party, quite generous ones. Also, $20,000 to his leadership campaign, right. Mr. Speaker. Now, my question is this why the Cormies were able to continue in business 4 years after and take down a lot of innocent Albertans in the process? Is this why?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's been found so badly off base, talking about a time when there was another government, another administration in 1969, and asking us to account for them in some way. And now he starts to yell because he realizes he's been so badly embarrassed. And if we want to talk about elections, Mr. Speaker, we had one recently in Chinook. They ran fourth and lost their deposit. For God's sake, don't tell me about elections.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition. Oh, is there? Sorry, I didn't see you, Honourable Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Could you miss, Mr. Speaker? Yes. Mr. Speaker, this supplementary to the Premier, in view of the fact what's clearly come out through the months in the, over the TV set and in the papers and what's accepted, would he now not put an end to this charade and quit holding back repaying the investors? It's obvious the government is at fault. It comes up every day. What is the reason for holding back now, just costing the taxpayers money?
Well, it's an incredible comment from the honourable member. We have an inquiry appointed by the courts who are dealing with this matter in public right now, and for him to say, well, let's brush it all aside and make some kind of a judgment instead is absolute foolishness, but typical of the honourable member.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Maybe we'll try to get some answers, Mr. Speaker, from that timid Premier, Mr. Speaker. My question I'd like to designate to the member from Vegreville, Mr. Speaker. Well, here's your research.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Donations.
To the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker, in addition to having to cope with this government's reduced commitment to funding education in rural areas from 85% of the total cost to 63% of the total cost, some counties like Two Hills are faced with dramatic declines in enrollments. Now, even though we're all glad to see that students are going back to school in northeastern Alberta, the long-term problem remains. And I'd like to know what commitment this minister is prepared to make to students, teachers, parents and trustees in rural Alberta to examine the impact of these funding cuts and move towards the 85% funding level again.
Hear, hear.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is perhaps a little incorrect in his assumption that all funding for rural boards in this province is at about the average of 65%. In fact, some boards are funded up to about 90% of their need beyond that which the province provides for them, in recognition of the very fact that the honourable member rightfully points out, and that is a difference in the ability of school boards to supplement what the province gives them. So I think it's very important to note that we are examining the manner in which we fund school boards in this province and have taken a leadership role in putting out a paper on exactly that issue, I would welcome his comments on those options.
Oh, nice.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, the fact remains rural Albertans are being asked to absorb an ever-increasing share of the cost of education, and I'm wondering, how does this minister justify asking rural Albertans to dig deeper into pockets that are already empty to make up for this government's declining commitment to funding education in rural areas?
Mr. Speaker, the government's support for basic education in this province has grown in excess of both the Consumer Price Index and the Educational Cost Index. To move to 85% funding would have the effect of, in fact, dropping support for some school boards who are receiving in excess of 85% funding from this province, and would as well require about $400 million. Perhaps the honourable member would like to suggest whether we propose a 267% increase in the corporate levy, or an increase of 8% in personal taxes, or any other kinds of options he would suggest to raise it to $400 million.
Well, supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Many boards, like the County of Minburn, are faced with some difficult decisions about the futures of schools like the Innisfree High School or the Lavoie Community School. Is the minister prepared to recognize now that the 3% cut in funding for education last year, along with a mere 2% increase in funding for education this year, is forcing boards to consider things like closing schools, larger classes, increased busing, and reducing opportunities for education?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's no question that there were adjustments that needed to be made both provincially and locally when the province was faced with the difficulty of a $3.5 billion deficit. But to suggest that school closures only occurred in last year is completely erroneous, because, as we know, school openings and school closures occur at all times during our province's cycles.
Well, supplementary, Mr. Speaker, like many rural school children, my kids get on the school bus before 7:30 every morning, and I'm wondering how much extra time do rural kids have to spend waste on school buses traveling to schools, and how many schools have to close before the minister is prepared to say enough is enough and that this government is going to renew its commitment to funding education in rural Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the funding of this province for education is something that I am very pleased to note has increased at a greater increase this year than to any other area of education. Yes, there are some difficulties, not restricted to the rural area, in fact, because kids in cities ride school buses as well. But I'm pleased to note that to date this year, there have only been requests for 3 school closures, and I hope that that number will not grow at all, in order that we can continue to provide the access to education in this province that all our students deserve, rural or urban.
Supplementary. Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Minister of Education, and with regard to funding and with regard to Northeast Alberta, where the honourable member from Vegreville is from. The minister said last week that she was holding back $40,000 a day, Mr. Speaker, for the strike. Now the strike's settled, that comes out to a little over $900,000. She rightfully said it shouldn't go to the teachers, they weren't working. Rightfully said they shouldn't go to the boards weren't operating the school. But should it stay in the hands of the government? Would not this government then return that $900,000 to the taxpayers of that area, so that the board then could further have a better chance of financing the problems that the honourable member for Vegreville just pointed out, instead of sitting on the $900,000?
Thank you, honourable member. Ministerial statements are passed. Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to believe it would be exceedingly wrong to support a school board when a strike is occurring by provincial funds. Given that a school board does not pay 80% of its budget, which is teachers' salaries, to a school board, the provision has been in our School Act for many, many years that where a strike is occurring, the province will withhold funds. I think that the point should also be made that it would be very unfair to those boards who are currently negotiating and have negotiated a settlement with current funding and with current laws in place. To then turn around and amend those laws in mid-process would be exceedingly unfair to a labour process which is based on 2 equal parties coming to a negotiated solution.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Little Bow.
This is to Premier, and if he's feeling fragile, he may want someone to help him. It's With respect to, Mr. Speaker, the government now has over $100 million out in loan guarantees throughout the province, with no particular pattern except possibly that they are Tories or contributed to the Tory party. Mr. Speaker, the second sentence now, these loan guarantees are of a great concern to the taxpayers because it could ultimately be a debt, Mr. Speaker, but maybe most of all, they're as good as a gift. They're the same thing as a gift now. First of all, could the Premier let the House know whether or not the guarantees, for instance, to Mr. Pocklington and the Cesarni Whitecourt Group have been backed by personal guarantees?
Mr. Speaker, guarantees are not made to individuals. And also, Mr. Speaker, I might point out to the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party that, as been expressed in the past in the legislature, price is paid for a guarantee by the firms who obtain such a support from the provincial government. And yes, Mr. Speaker, in any form of guarantee there is some risk. But let me tell the honourable member this. We're prepared to accept that risk. We have confidence in Alberta. We're turning this economy around. We're diversifying this economy, whether you like it or not.
Mr. the Premier has a lot more faith in Mr. Pocklington than many others do, and some of the others put the guarantee out. But could he then go this far? In most cases, the guarantee, there's a loan guarantee and also there's a loan. Which expires first, the loan guarantee or the loan, or do they expire at the same time, or is the guarantee the one that expires last? Which expires first? In other words, how big a hook are we on here?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was kind of a gibberish question. If you try to make any sense out of that, put it on the order paper.
Mr. Speaker, he runs for cover very quickly, very quickly. Let's go a little bit further then. You mentioned that the guarantees were the corporations. Does the guarantee, is he aware whether or not the guarantee is still in effect even if the ownership of the corporation that have been guaranteed has changed? Is the guarantee always in effect no matter who owns the corporation?
Mr. Speaker, various guarantees have different conditions in them. If the honourable member wants to identify a particular guarantee somewhere in this province and put it on the order paper, an effort will be made to see if it can be answered.
Speaker, I have asked that repeatedly for guarantees. They say it's a secret code. Now, they say they can't give it away. Now, the Premier can't have his cake and eat it too, Mr. Speaker. Either he refused to answer it or he said it isn't a secret. Now, why he can't release it, I don't know. Let's go a step further. Then, is he aware, if in the case, if the guarantee, let's for instance say Pocklington and the Cesarni people, is it possible that they can turn around and sell the whole deal, make a tremendous capital gain, and we're stuck with guaranteeing a loan to an entirely new set of people?
Any trade shares?
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member is referring to guarantees generally, not a specific one. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, if he has any interest in getting more details on a specific matter, he should put it on the order paper. But let me tell him again, success that is going on in this province right now, we know the honourable member and that party and the opposition don't like what's happening in Alberta because things are so good. They loved it when unemployment was high. They loved it when the price of oil was down. They can't stand success because they are so negative. Too bad.
Ken, if you want, you're wasting question period time, but the Chair recognizes Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, is the reason that the government is scrambling around very quickly and passing out money with no particular game plan, or at least none that's made public, and with no debate in the House, is it because they're afraid that when January rolls around next year that the Americans would consider those kind of things as unfair subsidies under the free trade agreement?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, it's remarkable the amount of money we give the opposition for research, and to have the gibberish from the leader and then from this guy over with a question, so lack of research and information in it. The government, and they don't like it, is making sure that this economy is turning around. We promised it to Albertans, we're doing it. We're making sure we're providing jobs, we're doing it. We promised we'd diversify the economy, and we're doing it. That's why we're making loan guarantees and other things, because we're doing it for the people of Alberta. Too bad.
Member for Little Bow, followed by... just a moment. Member for Little Bow, followed by Edmonton Centre, then Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Associate Minister of Agriculture that attended a meeting in Bow Island last night of some 250 farmers that were rather unanimous in their opinion that changes should be brought about in the Alberta Agricultural Development Corporation policy with regards to beginner farmers. My question to the Minister is, and this was asked last evening as well, is the Minister prepared to give those young farmers that are now facing a quit claim, as of today, some, and as of this week, the option of a 5-year leaseback of their lands so we can keep young people in rural Alberta?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the question. You notice I took my beads off because I expected it. I did, Mr. Speaker, attend a meeting in Bow Island last night with a number of people who were interested in the financial difficulties in agriculture, and they did not specifically ask for changes in the beginning farmer program, although I said we're looking at changes in the beginning farmer program. Some of them did, however, Mr. Speaker, suggest that they are having difficulty meeting their loan obligations and are looking at quit claims, and some of them in fact were looking at a 5-year lease back on a quit claim. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that I have great empathy for the problems that these young people are suffering. I have great empathy for their desire to farm, and I will look at all alternatives in order to assist and be responsive to the problems that they have and responsible to the taxpayers of this province.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier, and it's on the word of responsiveness. The Minister last evening indicated before a policy change could take place that it had to go through the Conservative Caucus Committee, Agricultural Committee, through the caucus in general, through a Priorities Committee, then through Cabinet, and possibly then we'd have new policy. Our problem, Mr. Premier, is that farmers are in the field today. Within 10 days we will be seeding, and there is no policy change on the horizon. My question to the Premier, would the Premier intercede in this matter and see that this policy I've just enunciated in question number 1 would be dealt with as immediate as possible?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member does explain the process under which policy changes are made. The fact that it has to go through a series of approvals is the way a government operates, and certainly it's the way our caucus operates. The honourable member is working already within caucus and cabinet to have certain changes. I don't want to be specific in terms of that matter, and it may be that we're able to move fairly quickly. However, it's just one of the options that the honourable member is raising that we're considering.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Associate Minister. Could the Minister indicate what other options are available to these young farmers that are facing a quit claim and are going to be leaving the farm this spring? What other options are going to be made available to them immediately? The decision is required now.
Whatever now.
Mr. Speaker, we have made a number of changes, which I've enunciated for the member from Little Bow before, and as the Premier indicated, we are looking at other options. At this, I'm not about to outline options that are being assessed in caucus before we have made the decisions on them. In terms of leasing the land, ADC has been given the directive to act in a responsible manner to ensure that the ADC land is managed properly, is farmed and looked after on a regular basis, and at the same time not become a land bank. And there are cases where ADC is leasing, and I know in many cases where there are quit claims they will lease, or proportional quit claims they will lease for a year and then look at the 2 and 3 and up to 5-year leasing option. But the number one criteria has to be, in that case, the ability to make it on the farm, and that has to be shown in order to lease the land, and certainly in order.
Thank you. Supplementary, final.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister clarify the statement just made as to whether there is a policy in place as of today that a young farmer facing a quit claim can lease the land back for a 2 or 3, and I believe the Minister said a 5-year period of time? I didn't hear about that last night, nor have I heard about it before.
Mr. Speaker, on a proportional quit claim, and I've enunciated it before, one of the agreements that we've reached and the ADC has reached is that there would be the option of a 1-year lease. And that's to give a beginning farmer an opportunity to look at his situation and to assess it, and then to look at a possible 3-year. And we've said in an extenuating circumstances, there might be a 5-year. We haven't ruled it out, but it's not a policy that we have 5-year leases. But we do want ADC to have the flexibility to look at it. On a quit claim, for the, in most cases, the leases are done on no, I have too. In most cases, the leases are done by tender. So.
The answer. Thank you. Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, just back to the Premier. View of the fact that the process is as slow as he says it is to go through the caucus and the government, would he not at least have ADC suspend any quit claims for the next year until the policy is decided one way or another? After all, neither the farmer or the farm is going to.
Honourable member, the supplementary question has been asked. Order, please, honourable member. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond to that, because suspending the all quit claims would be detrimental to some people who want to quit claim, in fact, and they want an answer, and they certainly don't want your suggestion of waiting for another year in agony and suspense until they know the decision.
Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given mounting evidence, political pressure, and preventative common sense, it seems that almost everyone but the obstinate Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care agrees that sterilization procedures for women and men are an integral part of a comprehensive health care system and must be covered under Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan. Given also the 7.4% increase to the fund this year, when will the Minister announce the reinsurance of contraceptive counseling, surgical sterilization, IUD insertions, and vasectomies under Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan?
First of all, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated in the legislature last week, we never did de-insure contraceptive counseling. Doctors are asked to and indeed do provide contraceptive counseling and birth control advice and information in a variety of fee schedules that are now paid by the Health Care Insurance Plan. Perhaps the honourable member could refer to Hansard of last week when one of his colleagues asked a similar question. With respect to the other matters of the insurance of tubal ligations and vasectomies and IUD insertions, I've indicated as well in the legislature that we're reviewing the comments that come from our citizens with respect to those matters, particularly with reference to whether or not there's a burden on individuals for the cost that may be being charged by the medical profession at this time for those services. When that review is complete and when we have additional information, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to share it with the honourable member.
Well, it's nice that you're reviewing it. Will you then tell me what would be the status of a 38-year-old mother of 3 who's due for a cesarean section later this month and who has to pay out of pocket $400 for a tubal ligation? Does she have to wait for your review, pay for it now, or wait until it's reinsured and have the procedure later under Alberta healthcare insurance?
Mr. Speaker, it is malpractice for a medical doctor to refuse to provide service of any kind to an individual because of that individual's inability to pay. I would ask the honourable member if he would give me one single case in this province where an individual has been refused medical services because of the inability to pay. Just one single case.
I wonder if the minister is going to de-insure heart transplants for people's inability to pay for them. After his statements over the weekend, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Community and Occupational Health here in the House and before the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care expand on the meaning of his statement, and I quote, that for the health care insurance plan to be tinkering with reproductive health makes me more than a little uncomfortable, end of quote.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to respond. It was a matter that I have spoken about and the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care has spoken about on numerous occasions, and I simply reconfirmed on Thursday and reconfirm now what the Minister said, that these matters of de-insurance will be reviewed by the provincial government, by our caucus in the days ahead, and that is something the Minister has said repeatedly.
Well, maybe we can get to the big boss who's making all the health care decisions over there, the Premier, who has announced his own health commission, announced the $70 million for the cross-cancer and other announcements that we expect the Minister to make. Will the Premier here today announce, take some leadership and show to the people of Alberta that he will announce the reinsurance of contraceptive care for the women of this province? Come on.
Mr. Speaker, the matter has been dealt with by the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care already in the House and last week. But I was interested to note that when he challenged the honourable member, he quickly changed the subject.
That's right. That's right. Edmonton Goldbar. Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. All this blather about reproductive health care and poor old FCSS going down the drain, and when on earth, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister require and provide the resources so that all of the public health units can provide this kind of counselling, family planning counselling, contraceptive counselling in every part of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I have to address the preamble to the member's question, which talks about family and community support services, which has enjoyed an increase over the last 3 fiscal years of some 30% in its funding. But as for reproductive health and sexuality education and clinics throughout the province, Mr. Speaker, I think that is a matter that I would want to address in the days ahead when we announce some elements of our comprehensive reproductive health strategy.
Thank you. Additional supplementaries. Failing that, the member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Edmonton Beverly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. The Premier has this famous blueprint for diversification, which is clearly focused on large business. Diversification through small business has been left out of the equation. Could the Premier please tell us how he can claim a balanced blueprint for diversification when fully $400 million has been put into 15 large corporations in support for small business through AOC, and economic development and trade has actually been cut?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member obviously doesn't know anything about how businesses work.
That's right.
When we provide $1.4 billion of forestry projects in northern Alberta, that not only helps businesses, small and big, in Edmonton, it helps them all over northern Alberta. It helps small businessmen in Whitecourt, Peace River, in Hinton. It helps them throughout northern Alberta. All he has to do is travel in the areas and see the bustle and the hum of small businesses expanding. Then, Mr. Speaker, we also know that there was $1.1 billion provided to small businesses, long-term funding to small business at fixed interest rates. It's not available anywhere else in Canada. It is here in Alberta.
That's right.
The Premier is referring to an interesting trickle-down theory of economic development. Does the Premier have facts to demonstrate how it is that putting money in the hands of 15 corporate presidents, large corporations, actually trickles down to specific small business sectors which we need to develop in this province, manufacturing, for example?
Mr. Speaker, I guess all you have to do is get out of the ivory tower wherever the honourable member spends his time and see what's really happening in Alberta.
Could the Premier please indicate to us how it is that putting all his economic development eggs, or a large part of them, in 15 corporations, specific corporations, in any way compares to the kind of economic diversification potential that can be achieved by supporting a broad base of small business entrepreneurs in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, there are certain large projects that are so important to this province, and the government is prepared to support them because we have confidence in this province. What we've been able to do, Mr. Speaker, is no longer have Alberta's economy based on agriculture and energy, but we've been able, through assistance and financial strength of this government, to provide growth in tourism, in forestry, technology, research, and the people of Alberta have responded. Small businesses are growing, incorporating all over this province, and you see the economy turning around. And I know the opposition doesn't like it, but the government's going to live up to our promise that they have this economy turn around, to diversify this economy, and the honourable members hate to see it happen, and they want to somehow knock a hole in it. They can't do it because it's going on right now.
How many small businesses are actually failing? Could the Premier please indicate to us how anybody in this legislature or in this province can possibly believe that there isn't a concerted shift of emphasis from small business support by his government to large business?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Trade, who works on this every day, may want to also add to my comments. But here's a release from the Alberta Opportunity Company. March the 4th, 1988. The Alberta Opportunity Company authorized 40 small business loans totaling in excess of $2.5 million. A total of 100 positions were created by these businesses, bringing total employment to 213. These were in northern Alberta and in central Alberta. These were grocery stores, convenience stores, fast food distributors, ambulance service, general stores, insurance agencies, video arcades, grocery stores, photograph processing. These
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Premier. Has it been decided, the New Democrats, which is the supplementary? St. Albert?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I not like some of my brothers to the left here, support some of the Conservative government's moves in getting some of these bigger projects going. But my supplementary to the Premier is this, Mr. Speaker, is seeing as how this government's got all this money for those large businesses out there that are going to build all these jobs, could he guarantee Albertans, those tradesmen working on those jobs, are going to get paid adequate wages on those jobs?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the agreements between management and labour are worked out between the two, and certainly the history has been in Alberta that that workers have received adequate wages. As a matter of fact, Alberta's average wages is second to only one other province in Canada. Now, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, I have been talking about a matter that the Minister of Economic Development and Trade is dying to get in on. I'll see if he has some additional information to provide.
Mr. Speaker, there's always a risk when an honourable member, such as the member for Meadowlark uses linear thinking and looks at a line on a budget and doesn't take into account factors that he may not be looking at, such as the small business equity corporations, where the government invested $55 million, Mr. Speaker, and that program is working now and is working in that it has provided investments in over 400 small businesses, created 3,600 new jobs, and is still working. So because, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't show up in the current, estimate, the honourable member isn't aware that it is working. The fact that there are 50% more small businesses in Alberta now than there were in 1977 tells you that small businesses are flourishing.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Minister. Calgary McCall, followed by Edmonton Beverley, then Edmonton Strathcona. Briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, on the same similar question, could the Minister indicate, when you consider the small business and the emphasis that we do place on small business, how many small businesses were actually commenced in 1987 in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, it's important that we have questions that are constructive in the Assembly. And yes, the environment for small business, including manufacturers and in a whole variety of fields that really have their incentive as a result of major projects going ahead that cause the indirect spin-off in the small business community that more than... They don't want to hear this.
And I'm sure all honourable members wouldn't mind sitting for a few minutes and meditating. Minister of Economic Development and Trade, try again, please, to the answer.
Mr. Speaker, that in addition to the fact that the failure rate of small businesses last year dropped dramatically from previous years as a reflection of the results of the Small Business Term Assistance Program in providing assistance to small business. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, there were 17,000 incorporations in 1987, and that does not include the individual proprietorships or partnerships that were formed. So it was a very successful year in terms of formation of small business.
The member for Edmonton Beverley, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. The federal Tories are saying to our rural Albertans that they have to cut their mail services because of the high cost of services in providing door-to-door service in urban centres. At the same time, they're saying to residents in urban centres that their costs are excessive and they have to cut mail services to them as well. Will the minister demand his federal counterparts to discontinue this conquer and divide tactic, would rather apply their energies to developing a more effective rural post office system?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have a federal counterpart in that particular field. There's no post office service department of the government of Alberta, and I can't understand why the honourable member for Beverley, as did the honourable member for Vegreville on the last week, asked me questions relating to a matter which is solely within the constitutional responsibility of the Government of Canada. The Chair gives the direction of Scotian 359-6 relating to administrative competence of the government. This is the problem of the question with regard to the other day and also the order paper, but please continue, Edmonton Beverley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really, I think what we're really seeking here is the representation from this government to the federal level. They have a responsibility to Albertans. While door-to-door mail services are not necessarily essential services, I do think they are a basic service. And there are people in our society who require it, such as the disabled, the seniors, and those that are homebound. Will the minister make representation to his, or is the minister not feel this unfair and discriminatory that these people not receive mail services?
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, I do not have a counterpart at the federal level because there is no responsibility on the part of the...
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I think we'll continue if it quietens down. A supplementary question, but we're examining the Constitution of Canada at the moment up here in the chair as to what the rights of the post office are.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that the government has a responsibility to represent the people of Alberta at Ottawa, and that's the minister's job. Will the minister attempt to convince his federal colleagues that the policy of making the post office a profitable organization and is resulting in adequate services to, and in some cases, hardship to Albertans? Will he do that? Will he represent Alberta's cause in Ottawa?
Mr. Speaker, I have to repeat the same question, but I would suggest that the honourable member, if he is so concerned about this matter, should write a letter to his member of parliament.
Final
I think we've attempted to talk to our MLAs. We get the same kind of results we're getting from this minister.
Typical story.
And with regards to door-to-door deliveries, will the minister not protest this silly practice of those people who build a house in a new subdivision and don't qualify for a mail delivery, consequently are getting a super mailbox? Is that not discrimination against people because they build their house at a certain time of time? Stick up for Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I repeat the question, and I don't take it lightly. The matter is of concern to Albertans, obviously. The delivery of mail is a constitutional responsibility of the Government of Canada. Section 91 of the Constitution Act says so. And that being the case, it is up to members of this legislature and members of this province and citizens of this province to make their views known to the proper authorities. It is not the responsibility of this government to deliver the mail. Thank goodness.
Mr. Bradley, Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest. Vermilion Viking followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you. A supplemental to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Is postal service a business that Alberta Opportunity or perhaps VENCAP might look at in certain areas as the federal government may look at privatization of these sectors in the future?
Mr. Speaker, I understand that it is a constitutional responsibility of the federal government to deal with matters related to first-class postage, but there are a number of couriers that are in the business, and that, of course, is a private sector operation. I'm not aware of any of them having been financed through Alberta Opportunity Company.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Edmonton Meadowlark.
To the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, I'd just like to clarify this one point. Is the Minister saying to the people of Alberta that he will not use the power and influence and authority represented in his office as Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs to represent the interests of many urban Albertans who are suffering the effects of super mailbox mail delivery, which reduces their property values and which represents discrimination against their...
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Honourable Member. Minister, please.
I've already answered the question earlier. It is not a matter of to be taken lightly by anyone, and I'm not suggesting that. It is, however, for the benefit of the honourable member, if he is not familiar with the Constitution Act of Canada, it provides for a division of responsibilities. The responsibility for delivering the mail and Postal Services is found in Section 91 of the Constitution Act, which outlines the responsibilities of the federal government of Canada, not the provinces, and it is not the intention of this provincial government to take on the responsibility of the federal government. And he, like every other Albertan, if he is concerned about this issue, should take his concern to the proper authorities, not try to bring it into this Assembly, where it is not within the constitutional responsibility or authority of this.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Once again, the Chair would direct for the consideration of members that they would turn to Beauchesne 359 subsection 6, and also bear in mind that under the Constitution Act of Canada, Section 91, subsection 5 deals with this whole matter. Therefore, future questions on the issue will be dealt with more severely by the Chair. Orders of the day.
Committee of Supply,